All right, Tyler, I think we're probably good to get going here. So really quick, everyone, this is Marshall Seeds speaking from Ashling Partners, just moderating the session for Tyler Sofranek, who's the process mining tower lead for Ashling Partners. Just a couple administrative comments. All microphones are muted. Please feel free to pose questions via the Q&A button. And we will try to address those questions towards the end of the conversation. If we, for some reason, don't have time throughout this presentation and demonstration to address all those questions, we'll follow up after the call and be sure to answer your questions directly. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to you, Tyler.
Hey, thanks, Marshall. Hey, and thanks to everyone who's joined me today. My name's Tyler Sofranek. I'm currently the process mining tower lead for Ashling Partners, and I'm going to talk to you today about my favorite topic, process mining and hyperautomation. So I just wanted to give a quick little background on where I come from, my experience with process mining. Prior to joining Ashling, I was actually working at 3M and spent about 2.5 years doing process mining sort of globally for 3M. Implemented about 8 different process models there to really help drive things like process conformance and process optimization across their global SAP footprint. So and that's really where I fell in love with the discipline, and I think that there's so many opportunities for other companies to really leverage the technology. So I'd like to talk to you about that today. Just a quick note, if you've not heard of us before, Ashling Partners, we've really got kind of 3 service offerings that we like to put out there. So number one is we educate the market on things like hyperautomation awareness, process benchmarking. We also build RPA solutions, process mining, intelligent OCR. So not only do we know the technology, we actually can implement it and build it for you. And we also like to help out in the overall sort of governance and sustaining and improving the overall RPA and hyperautomation footprints that we deploy. So those are our 3 primary focus areas as a company. With regards to today's agenda, I wanted to just talk first and foremost about what is process mining, what is hyperautomation. You may have heard of these terms before, but I think we would like to really define those and make sure that we all come to a common understanding of what they are. And then we can talk really more so about what the synergies are in hyperautomation, specifically relating to process mining. I'd like to give a quick demo of some of the concepts I'm talking about, and then share some tips for success about how to go about selecting your first process mining process and really get the most value out of that project. And then we'll open it up for Q&A, as Marshall said. But I think before we start, I'd like to just throw out a quick poll to see where everybody's at in terms of their understanding of process mining, and maybe even if there are some folks on the line who actually started doing process mining and want to know really how to get some more value out of it. So Marshall, I think you've got a poll here. So we'll give folks just a few more seconds to respond. Just 2 questions that shouldn't be too hard to fill out, I hope. Cool. All right. Well, it looks like we've got some relative newcomers to process mining, so we'll be sure to cover, the defining features of process mining and really, defining hyperautomation. And then I can talk specifically about some of these processes that you're interested in. So thank you for sharing. I can just minimize this poll here, right, Marshall?
Yep, you're good.
Cool. So yeah, let's jump right into it. Let's figure out what is process mining. What are we talking about when we say process mining? I'm sure it sounds maybe a little bit of a buzzword to you, but it is really a rapidly growing discipline of analytics. So what is it? How is it different from our existing analytical techniques? Process mining is really all about transforming log data into comprehensible business process steps. So we're really talking about taking some of the most complicated and deep tables that you probably are storing in your IT system, and using those tables and using that data to generate business process steps and business process flows that you can easily understand and then use to start exploring your process. So, I think the key here is really about leveraging log data that typically is very difficult to work with in a standard BI report or an analytical report, where you're just able to basically look at one log detail at a time. Process mining is able to take all of that in aggregate and make sense out of it in a comprehensible form. And then, really it's about telling the story of your business process. So, humans as by nature, we understand stories better than we understand KPIs. A KPI of, an on-time order delivery can mean something to us, but it means a whole lot more to us when we actually understand why that metric is the way it is, and we can tell a story about how it came to be. So process mining gives us that business context to really start to understand why maybe our deliveries were late to our customers, and we can start to break down the process steps that maybe contributed to that kind of lateness. And so as I'm talking about it, it's really about exploring the impact of certain process deviations on your higher level business KPIs. Process mining, as I said, does a great job of leveraging these logs. It does a great job of aggregating these process steps at a high level to give you some of those high level business KPIs, such as overall automation rates, or even, like I mentioned before, on-time deliveries. Those are the things that process mining is really good at uncovering, but then you can start to really drill in deeply to understand what are the specific steps and the specific scenarios where you're having trouble, say, delivering to your customers on time. So that ability to explore is really second to none when it comes to a process mining tool. And then hyperautomation, what is that? We need to kind of understand hyperautomation as a discipline, as opposed to just being, again, another buzzword that's getting thrown around, or RPA being repackaged. It's really not that at all. Hyperautomation is all about involving a range of tools. So that's a key word here, is the range of tools that are involved in hyperautomation, with that goal of increasing AI decision making. So we can actually start to infuse our robots and our automations with better decision making skills based on process and business metrics. So really evolving from those sort of simple, repetitive, basic tasks to more complex process assignments that require more insight and actually taking and making decisions. And then in terms of the actual technologies that we use, obviously RPA is the primary one that we're going to use to extend our hyperautomation initiative. And we've also got OCR and intelligent data capture. That's where we're actually looking, say, at documents and trying to pick out specific pieces of data from those documents that typically can't be fed directly into, say, like an ERP. And then, of course, we've got process mining here, giving us more of that business context So again, informing our robots so that, to tell them, maybe we've got something that's happened in the process that we want to flag and make a robot take action on. And then furthermore, making predictions using things like process mining and machine learning and AI to make predictions and maybe make some more proactive decisions using our bots. So this all really feeds into our intelligent automation flywheel, and you've probably seen this before if you've been to an Ashling Partners webinar, but this is really all about, this is the intelligent automation flywheel, and these are the core technologies that we see as driving hyperautomation. And really, the combination of these technologies delivers business value above the sum of their parts. So you're really getting more business value by combining RPA, process mining together than you would just by running RPA and process mining maybe separately and not really trying to interface them. So, and we can see that this flywheel keeps rolling and it keeps improving on itself. So, I want to talk a little bit about what I call the hyperautomation flywheel. And if you attended our session a few days ago with Brian Barrett, you probably saw the same graphic. I've added a few things to it here, and I'll talk through them. But primarily, what we look at in the hyperautomation flywheel is really a discover and plan phase, build phase, management and running, engaging and measuring. So, and that's just it's a cyclical phase where you got to continue to discover, build, and deploy. So, in terms of where process mining really fits in with hyperautomation, it's almost in every aspect of this flywheel. So we see synergies primarily in the discover and plan and build phase, where you're actually using process mining to feed that hyperautomation flywheel with new discoveries of what things you can do to improve your process. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. And then on the back end, we see really a great opportunity to measure the impact post-implementation of those automations. So you can actually start to take and understand what is the overall kind of effect on your larger process of these specific automations that you're implementing, maybe at a task or an activity level. So that's really a key area to focus on. And then thirdly, and I think the one that excites me the most, is really starting to leverage process mining as a trigger for automated workflows and augmenting human capability to react proactively to process deviations or process situations that may be forthcoming. So really it's about using process mining not only in the discovery and the post-implementation phase, but also in the actual build of your automations to actually make your automations even smarter and even more dynamic. So I'll talk about each of those kind of three main phases as I go through here. So when I talk about process discovery, analysis, prioritization, these are all things that you typically have to do even in a standard RPA deployment. You've got to discover what sorts of things you want to automate, analyze whether they're good candidates for that, and then prioritize this backlog of automation projects. So with process mining, you're really able to kind of supercharge your process discovery, especially those process discovery workshops. Specifically because you're coming to those workshops not with a blank slate of no understanding of the process, but you've got a model set up that tells you exactly what is happening throughout your process. So you're able to go in these workshops from how does this process work, which is just a very wide, open-ended question, which could reveal a lot of answers, to more pointed questions about why does the process behave in this specific way. And that, overall is going to make your conversations with those process experts in those discovery workshops much more productive. You're going to save a lot of time and headache by having a process model that's set up that you can actually compare, do reality checks against. So that's one of the first things that you'll notice as you're using these tools, that you can actually really enhance your process discovery workflow. The other thing, typically we've relied on users to report opportunities for um, for automations, or specific use cases for automations. With process mining, you're actually able to look at the process and discover what I like to call inorganic opportunities. These are opportunities that maybe a user wouldn't necessarily raise because, hey, they've just been doing their job this way all the time. They just figured this is kind of how the process works. But if you compare maybe two different sites against each other, you can find opportunities that say, hey, we're actually automating this process step in Germany, but we're not doing it yet in the USA. So why is that? Maybe there's some possibility to leverage some knowledge from outside of your typical area. The other thing that I think is extremely powerful about process mining, and that I've witnessed firsthand, is really that you can get a lot of insights out of just a single process model. Like I said before, using data change logs and application logs in a standard BI environment it's been challenging, and those are huge tables, and typically you've got to be very specific about what you're searching for. In the process mining framework, you can actually explore many different things, measure many different cycle times, automation rates within that process using just a single application and model. So you're not developing a single report every time you need to find a specific insight. You can actually go to this model and say, you want to understand what's my cycle time for paying invoices. What's my cycle time for paying invoices in this region? What's my cycle time for, prior to getting to the approval step? So you can glean a lot of different insights out of just a single model. And then I think one of the most important value drivers here for process mining is that you're then really able to do discrete business value analyses on those opportunities. So you can basically say, if we see check received invoices being done 1,000 times in a month, and we want to figure out how we can maybe automate that, we can say, that typically takes 10 minutes, and we do it 1,000 times per month, and this is the employee that typically does that step. We would be able to deliver back X amount of dollars back to the business and back to that employee by essentially automating that step and letting them focus on something more important, really. So once we have that business value, then you're able to really prioritize projects objectively. You can say, okay, these are going to be my primary automation business value drivers, so here's what we're going to go after. So I want to just do a quick demo, and I will pull up our UiPath process mining tool to kind of do that demo for you. So I really think that to understand the full potential of these tools, you need to really see them in action. So here's a basic analysis of a AP process. So we're looking at, how are we paying invoices to our vendors? And first and foremost, off the bat, we can really start to understand, how many invoices are we paying in a given month. My current period right now, this data set it's just a demo data set. So we're looking at the period of June 2016. And we can see we've got roughly 1,200 invoices and 7,300 events. So that's 7,300 events that have occurred over the course of these 1,200 or so invoices that came in this month. We've got 10 discrete activities, so 10 different activities that we've identified, and then there's 70 different ways that this process actually gets done across those 1,200 or so invoices, and 311 users in total are actually involved. So right off the bat, this is really interesting information to say that we'd like to see the number of variants, so the number of different ways that the process gets accomplished. We'd like to see that number shrink by as much as possible, and we'd also probably want to see that certain activities are not occurring too frequently within the process. So down here on the right-hand side, I've got my list of the 10 unique activities I identified. We can see that, what percentage of cases these activities are actually occurring in. So obviously we receive an invoice 100% of the time. Then we've got, a few standard steps that we're accomplishing here with check received invoice and paying the invoice. That's good that we're paying invoices. And then there's a few more that are starting to tail off here and maybe are more indicative of a process deviation or a step that you don't necessarily want to see happening in that process. So we've got things like request data, where maybe you need more data before you can actually pay that invoice. And then the other thing that's interesting is that we only see an approval for an invoice in 80% of the time. So maybe this is an activity that we would expect. We want to see this every single time because we don't want to let any invoices go without the proper approval. So within these process mining tools, there's ways to really set up a check for conformance, and even look at SLAs. And again, you can have many different SLAs or tags as they're known, to really highlight the areas where you're deviating from the expected process. So I will jump over here now, and we can kind of explore the process map a little bit more. And again, we see kind of the number of activities and the number of cases where these activities are occurring. We can kind of understand, I want to maybe focus in on request data, and let's try to figure out why are we requesting data so frequently. So I'll approve that selection, and that immediately filters my entire analysis down to show only those cases where we had to request data from the vendor. Again, this is something that's pretty tough to do in a typical analytical framework, but with process mining, I was able to do it in just a few clicks. Now, I want to actually zoom in a little bit more and do a kind of a more thorough analysis, looking at, by country or even by supplier here. I'm going to actually change it to the supplier to look at who our primary suppliers are. Now I can see, my suppliers here on the left-hand side, where we received invoices from all of these suppliers at some point in the last month, and then the specific activities that are occurring throughout the process, and what number of cases occurred where they occurred in that process. So the first thing that I want to kind of look at is, let's see, there's my request data. So first thing that sticks out to me is that we've got a large supplier here that's submitted 200 invoices to us over the past month. And the first thing that sticks out, or the second thing that sticks out, is that on 100% of those instances, we had to go back to that supplier and say, hey, we need more data. So this right here highlights an opportunity to work with that supplier, work with that vendor to maybe improve the data that they're submitting on their invoices, so that we don't have to do this rework step to go back and say, hey, we need more information before we can pay this invoice. Because if you have to do that on 100% of the invoices, it's a lot of wasted time. So again, here we could say, maybe requesting data takes 10 or 15 minutes to figure out what all needs to be requested, and you can start to really understand what the impact of that process deviation is on your process. Now, going even further, if I wanted to really start to kind of hunt for some automation cases, I can jump over here to this automation dashboard. I'm going to clear out my filter here, so we really get kind of an overall look. And I'm currently looking really only at medium invoices and small invoices. I can remove this filter again. We see that there's a number of different types of invoices that are coming through this process. Typically, you can filter down to focus on the specific ones that you want to really explore. So, as I did before, I'm just gonna focus on right now small invoices, and then also the medium invoices. So, this is the bulk of my really processing that I'm doing within my AP process, these small and medium invoices. Now this Process Explorer has been kind of modified to show me exactly which of my process steps are actually being automated. So I can see this according to this legend on the right-hand side. Receive invoice is being automated basically 100% of the time. And I can click over here to see that breakdown. So we can see that receive invoice, that's great. We've got an automated process for receiving and inputting invoices into our system. And then as we kind of look through it a little bit further, we can kind of see that a final check of invoice has some amount of automation. And that's the same with approve invoice. We've only got some amount of automation going on here. So this could sort of be indicative, you've got some sort of bot or batch process that does approvals for your invoices, but maybe it's not really, maybe it's not working, or maybe it's not fully extended across your entire range of businesses. So we can, to try to figure that out, we can again go to this sort of analysis tab, and this time I'm going to change my rows to actually represent countries. So again, it looks like, for the most part, everything that's being received is coming in through Germany. And then we've got really, the final check of invoice activity. In Germany, it's roughly 66% automated. Everywhere else, it's 0. And then again, with the approval, that's really where our automation comes from, is apparently from Germany, and nowhere else is really doing this. So so that would right there highlights an opportunity to go to our German counterparts and say, hey, can we figure out a way to leverage what you've already known about automating invoice approvals and extend that across all of our businesses, so that we can get that that value globally rather than just in a localized area. So this maybe would not have come up in a process discovery workshop, but right away with this tool, we can highlight exactly what process steps are automated, and then maybe what sorts of things could be further automated. So and then this is just a quick taste of what you can do with it. There's other use cases for process mining, including looking at timing, and really trying to understand what your cycle time is in the process. So we can look at the, if we wanted to say the overall throughput time. We actually can get things like these distribution charts that show you, how many cases fell into the kind of the 3-day, 3.5 to 4-day range, all the way up to, we've got some cases that are, almost 100 cases that are taking greater than 23 days. So we've got quite a long tail. So this is now where we can start to figure out what sorts of things do we need to do to really shorten this cycle time. And maybe this is not super important to you because you've got certain payment terms that you need to abide by. But if there were discounts that you could achieve by paying earlier, we can actually start to really dig into those and apply sort of dynamic due dates to your process. And right now, we've really got kind of 2 due dates set up within this analysis, and looking at, I'll switch to payment deadline. The same concept could be applied to like a discount due date payment deadline. So we can then break it down by country, seeing, we've got roughly, almost 50% late payments in Germany, despite them having some sort of approval process. So again, I'm still within a single app, and I'm already uncovering a lot of different things that we can do to improve our process. And really, you want to make sure that your process is steady state and optimized before you actually start to automate things in your process. The last thing I want to highlight here is this concept called tags. And I mentioned it just a little bit earlier, but tags are really a great way for highlighting specific maybe violations or process deviations that you want to make sure you monitor and can kind of then quickly take action on. So for each one of these tags here, I've got a specific kind of set of logic behind the tag that'll basically select and highlight each particular case that violates or matches this tag criteria. So the first few are pretty standard. You would expect multiple teams to be involved, so you've got some teamwork going on. That's great. But then, we've got things like rework activity, where this case is we had to request data multiple times from the vendor, and so you can see that in this current month we had 374 of those, whereas in the previous month, we had 467 of those particular violations. And then even further, you got payment SLA violations. So it's really extremely flexible in terms of how you set it up, and you can add your own tags, and really start to understand and highlight those kind of key process deviations that you want to monitor. So yeah, so with that, I think I'll probably end the demo, but then we can jump back into the presentation here, if Zoom will cooperate here. There we go. All right. Cool. And so, the next thing I want to really talk about is how you kind of measure and monitor post-implementation of your automation project. So it's very similar to how you did it in the very beginning, and kind of quantifying and prioritizing. But now you're really able to kind of compare that predicted business value to the actual business value, because you can see clearly, how many activities did your bot perform, and then even further, you can really start to understand what are the impacts on the downstream process steps. So you're going to actually see, what impact does that automation have maybe on your cycle time, on the number of payment SLA violations you had. So it's really going to help you kind of holistically understand what are your automations doing to your process beyond just having maybe a report that tells you this bot failed X number of times in a month. You can actually see what maybe that failure had, what impact that failure had, and make sure that the bots that are actually performing steps in your process, that they're doing what they need to, and they're not creating more work downstream for your other processors. And then really that's all about ensuring stability through this change process. Automation and even just process optimization requires a lot of change management, and so making sure that your processes and your business processes aren't negatively affected as you're implementing those changes is really a huge value driver for process mining in general, because you can quickly identify if the process is going off the rails and take corrective action. And then the last piece that I really am excited about is process mining as a workflow trigger, and I see this really as the next big phase of hyperautomation. And when I talk about process mining as a workflow trigger, really I think it comes down to combining process mining with your machine learning models, so that you can start to really leverage those process mining event logs and the business context of that process mining surfaces as a feature in those machine learning models. So it gives your bots the ability to maybe predict what should happen next in the process, or maybe take you can classify and give it with this process mining model, give it context in terms of what should be happening next, and make those predictions that you would then leverage to actually take action. And that's really transforming that insight directly into action. I think is huge, because you're no longer sitting there having to maybe run a report, do an analysis, and then take action. You can set these tools up to essentially take the insight as you've described it, and do a specific action based on a given set of criteria. So you're not going to have an analyst run a report and maybe email out a set of actions to take. Those can get automatically generated and assigned to the correct people, or even assigned to a robot to take that action. So yeah, you can trigger a bot, or you can notify a human based on process mining insights. and these tools more and more are giving you that ability to set that up without a super complicated automation workflow or something like that. So this, I think, is the area that we at Ashling and I think folks everywhere in the hyper automation space are really excited about. So to summarize, I wanted to step through here and kind of summarize, because I know that there's a lot coming at you, but we see benefits in terms of supercharging your process discovery phase, really providing a lot more value to the business process discovery discussions that you're having with your process experts. And I can't count the number of times that I've walked into a meeting with some process experts and they go, "Wow, I had no idea that was going on. Let's go look at this." And then being able to drill directly into the process and see the metadata around who's doing what at what time really gives you that ability to then go talk to the specific people that you need to uncover what you're looking for in your process. And then, of course, you're able to generate new opportunities for continuous improvement almost independently from your process discovery workshops. You can be in here looking at your process, just exploring and finding things that you want to maybe follow up with that you would never have been able to do with a standard report, or even maybe just interviewing the users, like I said. Then, of course, I think one of the main things that you want to do with any sort of RPA and continuous improvement project is really try to quantify that business value so that you can get the buy-in of business leaders in your organization. Because of course, without that buy-in, you're not going to be able to really drive that change management and the change that you need to see in the organization. So being able to quantify and really speak that language of the business rather than just saying, "Hey, we do this so many times a month, it'd be great if we could do some automation." Being able to say, this is the business value that we expect to deliver, and here's why we should do this, is going to be a lot more impactful than just coming to them with an automation project. And then overall, process mining, I think, offers just a great framework for good analytics and much quicker use, or much quicker. So you're able to do a lot more within a single analysis than you can within many different and developing many different reports in, say, like a Power BI or similar platform. Of course, those are great tools, but process mining as a discipline really helps you explore and get to those results much faster. And I think time to value is really the another key value driver of process mining, because you can get to those discrete process steps and improvements much quicker than you could normally. And then, as I mentioned, you're really talking about taking that insight and transforming it directly into an actionable step. So rather than, again, having reports that you need to go look at, you can take these tools and say, all right, we know what we need to look for. We've set up some tags to look for these process violations. Now we can determine what specific actions we need to take when we realize that there's a process violation upcoming or something that we need to take action on. If I could offer just a few tips for success from my experience at 3M and prior to that, you want to walk before you run. You want to start with a single system process and add complexity iteratively. If you try to boil the ocean, you will probably drown because there's just so much data, and it can be overwhelming to try to figure out what you need to focus on. So start with a single system process, something that's somehow, for the most part, contained within a single system. Train your process mining tool on that particular system, and then start to build out iteratively as you get a feel for how to use the tool, and you get that buy-in from your business users. And the other thing, I would say is also just to have regular meetings with your process stakeholders. Explore and review it. Do a gut check. Make sure that the data is looking correct. before you go, and you really can't, you won't be able to do anything without the process stakeholders buy-in. So really focusing on that change management, getting the buy-in of those process users and getting their insight on the process is invaluable. And then again, I'm going to stress it again, but always calculate that business value for your opportunities. There's no better way to kind of objectively prioritize process changes in RPA projects. So focus on, get a pipeline and get a method for calculating that business value. You could even build business value calculations directly into your analyses, so you can start to surface those even quicker. So that's something that we really try to focus on here at Ashling, as being a business value focused company. And then I'll just say a quick word on the Ashling process mining tool set. We are partners with all three of these companies, and all of them make really great products. Celonis has typically been recognized as the market leader, but we really see UiPath and Timeline PI both, making some nice gains and differentiating themselves in really great ways. So if you're in the process of evaluating these tools, please reach out, because we've got experience in all three and want to be able to help you through that process. So and that's about it. So I think Marshall, I think we can open it up for some Q&A now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tyler, appreciate it. There are several questions. So I'll start kind of with the first one that came in, kind of a chicken and egg question. It was, is RPA driving the need for process mining, or is process mining exposing the need for robotic process automation?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can work both ways. I'll say that, and it doesn't. You can have one without the other, but typically what I've seen, and especially kind of in my experience at 3M, was that brought process mining in kind of first, because we were in the middle of an SAP deployment, and really wanting to make sure that our processes, as we were deploying, were staying in a steady state and getting to a steady state in terms of how well they were performing before SAP and after SAP. So but then once we had that tool, we were able to say, wow, we can really start to measure process efficiency and process automation with these tools. So the process mining kind of discipline helps it to drive and highlight the need for even further automation within our process. But then on the flip side, you can definitely, you can be on that RPA journey. And then what we've sometimes seen with some of our clients is you get to almost a bit of a plateau in terms of what automation projects you're discovering and feeding into your pipeline. So if you find yourself at a sort of a plateau like that, process mining is just a great tool for helping you kind of reopen some of those process discussions and explore, like I said, those inorganic opportunities for process automation. So I don't think there's necessarily one right answer to that question, that you should do process mining first or RPA first, but I just think that together they're both much more powerful. So
sure. So we have another question in regards to the machine learning integration. So do you see the ML integration through workflow triggers as something to wait for process mining tools to incorporate into their own platforms, or is this something organizations should look to develop as a capability in cooperation with the data science capability or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So some of these tools have that machine learning, like a machine learning workbench, already incorporated into it. Celonis has a machine learning workbench that you can basically use to run Python machine learning projects basically right in the Celonis UI. Timeline PI has some low code out of the box, pre-built machine learning models that you can run, and I believe that UiPath is working towards that as well. So I think that we're on the horizon of having a lot more pre-built machine learning models incorporated into the products themselves. But I think that in order to really use those effectively, you should still have that kind of data science background to know that what is the proper use case for these pre-built machine learning models. So I'll say that I don't think that building up that intelligence within your organization would ever be a bad thing. But you could certainly leverage some of the pre-built solutions if you don't necessarily have that, but you want to get started with some more of that machine learning and workflow triggering as soon as possible. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. And so last question we'll vet here is around ownership, it appears. So who typically owns a process mining capability or platform, considering COEs and process improvement groups and Lean Sigma techniques?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great question. I've seen, a little bit, a mix of things, and I'll tell you from my experience what I think works and what doesn't work. I'll go back and first and foremost harp on the fact that you need to get business and process owner buy-in before you really can do anything with process mining that's going to have any impact. These tools, again, are primarily analytical tools, so the only value you'll get out of it is the change that you can make within your processes based on those insights that you get. So I think the best place for I'd say ownership, obviously you need some IT acumen to be able to do a few of these things, make sure the application's set up and running. But ultimately, I think the metrics and the process changes have to lie with those business and process owners. And so, it just kind of depends on how your organization is set up. At 3M, we had a Lean Six Sigma group that was a heavy user of the tool, but they didn't necessarily own the tool outright. But they were able to go to those business process owners and say, hey, we've surfaced something within your organization that I think you should be focusing on, say an on-time delivery, or for example, we used Celonis quite a lot for cycle time measurements in our order to cash process. It gave the black belts really the ability to go to those process owners and say, hey, you've got an extended cycle time within your process compared to other regions. We think you should be focusing on this, and that basically convince them to say, yeah, this is something that we should be focusing on, and we'll take ownership of the results of this metric, and then we can those continuous improvement groups can then work with the regions or the business process owners to really drive those improvements. So yeah, I'd say in terms of the actual ownership of the tool, it's got to at least be funded by the business and owned by the business. Supported by IT, and then really leveraged, I think, by your continuous improvement groups, whether that's Lean Six Sigma, or even just general maybe order to cash analysts. Those are probably going to be the primary users of the tool because they're really focused on improving the process. And then again, also focusing in on the COEs of the RPA deployment. I think those are also great organizations for not necessarily owning the metrics in the tools,